So this session is going to be on social choice theory. The title of the session is Social Choice, Incentives and Fairness in Decentralized Justice. Originally, Bruno Defin was supposed to give a talk here, and I'm replacing him, so you see even more of me. So on this panel, like you already know who I am. We also have Yann Aouidef, who is a PhD student at Paris 2, and has been working as part of the research team on the Kleros cooperative for several years now. And also Stefanos Leonardos, who is a King's person, associated with the King's Institute for Artificial Intelligence. So if you just want to briefly introduce yourselves, then we can jump into the longer introduction slides.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear her? So no?
Yeah, I can hear you very well.
So if you want to introduce yourself, maybe.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm Stefanos Leonardos. I'm a person here at King's. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there in person today. Really sorry about that. I only followed the afternoon talks through the Teams link. Really exciting. I'm a lecturer here at the Department of Informatics. My interests are in game theory, machine learning applications of artificial intelligence and machine learning in crypto economics, and mainly from the perspective of incentives, of providing the correct structure of these decentralized markets. Yeah, I'm very excited about the topic of the work.
Okay, thank you. And from our part, so yeah, I'm a PhD candidate at the Paris Center of Law and Economics and also a researcher at Kleros, and also have interest on game theory, social choice theory, law and economics, and also economic experiment that I will be able to present. Yep.
Yeah, so now we can delve into the intro presentations. So if it works for both of you, I'll start with my presentation. And let's see. My share button is grayed out. Right. All right, that's how I share. Yeah. Sorry, yeah. There we go. Okay, thank you. And now, where is the slideshow button again? Here? Yeah, perfect. Okay. So, talking about social choice theory, which is broadly a theory of how people make collective decisions, has a long history of studying voting systems, how people vote, how you collect those decisions into some kind of collective outcome. Rich, long, tradition going back hundreds of years, with researchers such as Condorcet and Borda, from the 18th century. But just if you have a basic, sort of question, where Alice versus Bob, I have some collection of Kleros jurors, they're voting, as we sort of saw earlier today. Kleros voting is based on this Schelling point principle where people are drifting around a special outcome. We think that people will think that the truth is some kind of special outcome. So everybody, recapping, imagines everybody else is going to vote for the truth. What happens, and I briefly mentioned this idea before, but delving deeper into it now, if you have lots of outcomes that somehow split the vote. So maybe I have multiple good outcomes, and if I'm trying to imagine how the other jurors are going to vote, I think, okay, options 1, 2, and 3, or the 3 angel outcomes, they're all great. They're all really honest, but realistically, the vote is going to be scattered between them. Where there's this distinguished outcome that's very different, and maybe that's my alternative focal point. I drift towards that because it's distinguished by the fact that it's being different than frankly, the good options. And how do we deal with this question, particularly keeping in mind that blockchain is very attack rich. So if splitting the vote might mean opening a bigger door for an attacker, because now if you only need 45% of the vote or 40% of the vote in order to win the case, if the winner of the case is the single option that receives the most votes, what's the first past the post system, that like the attacker doesn't need to have as many economic resources to buy votes to try to like corrupt people. The bar is lower. So that recaps what I said before. The solution, like the natural solution, is to parallel the kinds of results that people in the academic field of social choice theory have been thinking about for a long time now, which is to ask people for more information somehow. If you ask people just to like, please provide me one option on how you're going to vote, whether that's the outcome to a Kleros case or who you think should be your member of parliament, that's not very rich information. And people that have tried to like have better voting systems usually ask for more than that. So a classic thing to do is ask people to rank your votes. In political elections, this is used in Australian parliamentary elections. Please rank your options like 1 to N. And now I can say, okay, like angel 1, option 1, the other angels 2 and 3, devil last. And you know, I've expressed this deeper information that like really the devil option is really bad. I really don't want that. The other, you know, all the other options are all sort of more or less okay. And then gets the question of like, how do I put that richer information into a collective outcome? And this is where like weird stuff happens because there are lots of ways to do it, and they all have kinds of trade-offs, advantages and disadvantages. One classic system, which is pretty intuitive, is called the Borda system, where you award people a number of points. You say, okay, like the first choice, that gets 3 points. Second choice, 2 points. Last place, 0 points, whatever. And then you find the outcome that got the most points, and it wins. Intuitive enough. Another option, and this is what the Australian parliamentary elections do, is you use something called instant runoff, which simulates a series of runoffs, where people, you know, they rank their options again. And then you imagine what would happen if you had like a series of runoff elections, like maybe every week you came back and voted, and every time you eliminate the candidate that comes in last, and then the next week you come back and vote among whoever is left. Instant runoff simulates as if you've done that with a single vote. You rank options 1 to N, and then you count who came in last in terms of their first choice votes. They're eliminated. And then you look at how other people like would have voted according to their ranking if you had a runoff election where that option is no longer there, by attributing anyone who voted that first place to their second place option. And you just keep doing that until eventually you have a winner. There are other choices. There are other voting systems. There are lots of other rich voting systems that use other ways to aggregate ranked options. There are also different things you can do that ask for slightly different kinds of information from the participants. There's a voting system called approval voting, where you just like click yes or no for each option, but you can click yes for multiple options. You can say, okay, I approve of this, this, and this, don't approve of that. You don't make any distinction between the things you approve of. And then classically, approval voting looks at the option that gets the highest rate of approval. Like similarly, there's a voting system called majority judgment, where you have kind of Yelp-style voting, where it's like, okay, I give people a rating, but I can give multiple options the same rating. Like multiple options can be great. I can have different levels. Like, you know, like all the options could be awful if I wanted, and somehow I'm providing like richer information to the voting system. And mostly, like the theory of this historically has been born again of people thinking about political elections. There are interesting sort of results where people show that there are like limitations on this. There's a famous result of Kenneth Arrow's impossibility theorem that showed that if people like vote using a ranked ballots voting system, that it has weird behavior in certain specific ways you know, if the voting system doesn't have like, it has like sort of basic properties one would want to have. It doesn't have a dictator just determining the vote, some other sort of natural properties. Ultimately, there will be space for strategic voting. There will be space where if this was a political election and I was trying to like express my actual human being preferences, that I could manipulate my preferences and like rank in a different order from what I actually believe to like try to manipulate the outcome. We have seen parallels to this in using Kleros, these kinds of voting systems for like crowdsourced dispute resolution, where the option is the question is no longer like what do I want to win, but more like, we're trying to provide honest answers about a real question we see, and like trying to provide truth to the blockchain. Where I proved a theorem that shows like it has lots of parallel scales in possibility theorem, even more similar to the Gibert-Satterwey theorem. That basically you have more than 3 options, you have 9 binary choices. That this whole notion of providing a vote that you expect other people to vote for is kind of self-defeating in this specific sense that if there will be weird situations where you are incapable to, where it doesn't make sense to vote the most likely options to win. Like if you try to vote like Alice is the most likely, Bob is the second most likely option to win, like your own vote can have like can impact the results in such a way that whatever you try to do, you change the probabilities so that you are self-defeating and you cause Bob to be more likely than Alice, and you have sort of weird pathological effects that mirror the errors of the possibility theorem. And then ultimately, like what people in social choice theory have done is to say, okay, like there's no perfect voting system. They all have these like weird pathological effects. Like, there is strategic voting in basically every system. And then you ask, okay, like different voting systems can have different strategic effects. And you ask for trade-offs. Okay, like I have to accept that like there's some kind of strategic voting, but you can have different kinds of strategic voting. Like in some cases, like if I move an option up, that can never cause it to be less likely to win. But if I want that property, I have to sacrifice other stuff. So people come up with these sort of like trade-off tables where they say, okay, I like want like this property, this property, this property. This makes sense in my use case. I have to give up this, this, and this. And people historically, like there have been tremendous numbers of theorems saying, okay, like if I, this voting system has this, but not that, this, but not this. And when you approach like trying to do this for Oracle questions, asking people what like the answer to a question is, again, it's a slightly different setting where, you're no longer expressing preferences, but you're trying to answer a question. What is the right collection of trade-offs? What things do I care more about? How do the different voting systems impact attack resistance? Yann will talk more about this in a second in an empirical setting. Do I want obviously I want the system to be sort of less complex because it's on a blockchain, so it requires gas. These sort of questions around clone independence are related to divisions of the vote. If I have similar options, how will that impact the aggregation of the vote? What sort of like we've done a lot of research over the years that have tried to think about like what is the appropriate voting system for a system like Kleros when you have non-binary choices, and like what are the right are the goals you want for that system. So just to wrap up, like one particular kind of non-binary case that we care a lot about is numerical cases. This can be particularly important for like settlements or in sort of insurance payoffs. Someone buys some kind of decentralized insurance. Kleros decides that they deserve some kind of compensation. How much? Probably somewhere between like the minimum possible payout and like the max. Like the natural voting rule would be to have each participant submit a number and then take the median of those numbers. I have this like extra structure because people all are submitting numbers that I can do number operations on them, including like taking averages or medians. There's lots of interesting sort of questions around like, what is the manipulability of that? Like how attack resistance is this? People have looked at kind of micro cheating. So if you imagine the attacker has some number of votes, how much can they move the result? Like if you think of a median as like the average of, like the sort of middle participants here, if like, say I just have all honest participants, I have some distribution for how much noise they're going to see when they look at the state of the world. The people in the middle are sort of like better than the others. They're providing more accurate information. But if I have like a votes dedicated to an attacker, they can kind of nudge the median over to a little bit. Basically what they have the ability to do is they like the more votes an attacker has, the more they can drag the median along the bell curve of people's signals. So that gives you a sense of like how attack resistance is, and you like ask, can you do better? Are there better systems? What is the appropriate voting system for a numeric kind of question? We have some research on this. I invite people who care more about this, to read this paper I wrote several years ago with my co-author Clement. So I'll just leave that there. We'll come back to some of these ideas in the open questions. But generally, what is the appropriate voting rule for decentralized justice, depending on the type of question you have.
Si je peux avoir et la souris. Okay, so on the top. All right. Okay. So, following William's presentation, I'm going to try to present you the approach of Kleros on concretely how we try to take advantage of social choice, game theory, and the underlying incentive. So, the main question actually to this panel is what role do social choice theory and incentive models plays in decentralized justice? So, first thing first, the approach of Kleros is basically how can we settle a decentralized system for dispute resolution? But first, for dispute resolution happening on-chain. So that's the main point. And then why not bring off-chain dispute in the Kleros protocol? So this question asks us how can we interact in a decentralized way? So meaning no centralized entity that will be able to discriminate among dispute and decide the outcome of any dispute. And this is where intervene basically social choice theory. It's at the core of this approach and project and also challenges. So let me remind you some stuff about Kleros. So basically Kleros involves jurors, right? So we are not going to dive into how they are selected, but it's also part of the incentives and game theory and approach of Kleros. It's quite important. But I would like to present you our work on voting method, which is very important, as William said a few minutes before. So you have the jurors and you have the chaining point. That's super important. So Kleros is based on the chaining point environment. So ideally, with the chaining point environment, what we want is people that cannot communicate will be able and will find the focal point, meaning the most logical option among a set of options, basically, that we define as strategy. And so they have this goal, this interest, basically, as economic engine, in the sense of game theory, to reach this focal point. And so at Kleros, we do consider that the focal point is an Nash equilibrium and an optimal solution, regarding the fact that they are those focal points are the result of some logic, some common sense, basically. So it's very important. And also we have the appeal system, which is basically part of this game theory mechanism, because it allows jurors and parties to escalate a game in the sense of game theory and to defend. It's basically, if we formalize the thing, it's basically a defense mechanism in the sense of game theory, defense against different type of attacks. I will present you some attacks that we tested, basically. So what is the theoretical aspect behind Kleros? It's quite simple. It's basically that regarding the chaining point environment and the incentives underlying, jurors should win on average if they behave honestly. So everything is about honesty, and that's where the fairness and the legitimacy of Kleros is basically it's about those honest behavior. And so the goal of Kleros and all the research and all the mechanism design and to make sure that jurors in average will win if they behave honestly. And logically, if they do not behave honestly, they have to lose money in an average, of course, because you need to have a set of games to implement those incentives. And so regarding this thing that we want, we have obviously inherent risk to the protocol. So we have basically the P plus epsilon attacks, the Sybil attacks, and clone dependency. I will develop those things a bit later. But regarding those type of attacks, we have the underlying risk, which is like gain maximization. So people will just take advantage of the system to maximize their gain despite voting honestly and making money from this behavior. That's a thing that obviously the Kleros protocol doesn't want. It's put at risk the protocol and of course can lead to non-optimal solutions. So meaning solutions that do not reach the focal point. So before introducing the economic experiment that we did, let me give you some aspect of the assumption of Kleros, so the chaining point theory. So as I said, no communication leading to the more logical option, right? So the focal point. Also the desirable properties from the choice theory. So as William presented, you have different properties from the voting methods, right? For instance, we assume that ranking voting methods are more interesting because it's a better mechanism to discriminate among a set of options, more sophisticated because of the ranking, right? So we want to take advantage of that. And obviously, we want to take advantage of the game theory aspect, basically, because we don't consider that at the end of the day, jurors are basically economic agents, and they're going to have a logical strategy, right? And the final goal of Kleros is basically make the optimal strategy to behave honestly. All right, but so that's the theory, right? And obviously, it makes sense to consider testing the theory, right? Because we want to make sure that the Kleros has the ability to generate consistent decision in the face of different voting methods and facing malicious behavior, basically. So that's where is the interest of doing some economic experiment. So basically what we did, so we gathered a bit more than 300 persons in a set of rounds. It's like 25%. It was split into three type of experiment that I will explain. But the core of the experiment, the idea was to create a subjectivity that we can find on the Kleros dispute resolution mechanism, basically, because jurors are basically facing subjective questions, right? So to some extent, we consider Kleros as an oracle, but Chainlink is more working on objective information, and for us, more subjective information. And this is where we have interest with focal point to raise this subjective focal point, basically. So we use like colors, different colors generate randomly, and where the person that we tested had to discriminate regarding one witness's color. So the condition of the experiment was obviously no communication to replicate the chaining point environment. It was conducted in a very appropriate space, in the laboratory, basically. So we were able to monitor them and make sure that they were basically voting in the relevant condition. And we studied three voting methods: majority rule, which is basically the current voting method used by the mechanism design of Kleros. We also tested Borda and would serve. Why? Because for the V2 of Kleros, we are considering more sophisticated voting method regarding the social choice theory, and Borda and would serve as ranking method have more interesting properties than majority rules. And in theory, regarding specific attacks that I'm going to develop. So basically, those experiments tried to test three types of attack. Sibyl attack. So it's an attack where a person find a way to have more voting power that the person should have had, basically. So if we are like an assembly of 10 persons, let's say one person, one vote. If someone attack the protocol and get more than one, strictly more than one voting power, it's a Sibyl attack. So concretely, on-chain, how you can do that is just it's a bit more complex, but it's like creating a wallet then and being successful of being selected with many wallets, basically, and then you will be part of the jurors assembly in the frame of the Kleros protocol with plenty of your wallets and just have like strictly more than one voting power. And of course, you have more influence on the outcome of the dispute resolution. We have also a type of attack that we consider clone independence. So jurors on the Kleros protocol have to decide among a set of option, basically, and sometimes you can have a party, that could like create options that are quite similar, and the interest into that is to make very difficult for the other jurors to choose among a subset of options that are very similar, specifically with the majority rules voting method, because for the others, it's like, well, they are super similar. I know that the outcome, the focal point is there, but I cannot discriminate among those two options. For instance, let's say I do consider in a dispute that we should pay back a party, but the only options dealing with paying back is like giving 50% back or 51% back. Well, I don't know which is better, 50 or 51. For me, it's the same, but I think the person should be paid back. And then in those consequences and in the Kleros environment, people could have the incentive to move away from this subset and take another option that is completely different because they cannot discriminate among this subset of options, and that's a big problem, right? And finally, the bribe attack, so this ability to bribe a user and make sure that he's going to vote for another option compared to the option that he does consider or she does consider as the more relevant regarding honesty. So, about the results. So for the Sibyl attack experiment, so we find out that majority is actually the more resistant voting method, and almost by 10% difference plus. So it's quite, I don't know if we can say surprising, not necessarily, because it's a more accessible voting method, technically speaking. But if you follow the social choice theory, would serve and Borda are way more sophisticated. So we would have expected that would serve and Borda would lead to better consistent votes. We have been proven wrong on that. So basically, it's questioning us on how can we deal with the chaining point environment, right? And regarding the properties that we want to bring on chain with social choice theory. So about the clone independence experiment, it's Borda that won basically following, well, not exactly following, but majority like at the second place with like, almost, a bit more than 4 point difference. So it makes sense to us, a bit surprised with would serve, but one explication could be like would serve is more complex border in the computation. So maybe the person tested was like, wow, it's complex to, compute would serve, and border basically like ranking. So with an environment of clonal dependence and where you have like similar option, it makes sense like ranking voting method are more efficient, because when you cannot discriminate among a subset of option, then with a ranking voting method, you can just put one first and the second in the second ranked second, and then for the rest like third and even last, etc. So yeah, that's also an interesting result. And finally, for the bribe attack, well, again, majority is outperforming, border and would serve, kind of also surprising. And yeah, so by a lot, also almost like 10 points difference. And about the bribe accepted, well, it's not that much different, right? People tend to accept a bit more the bribe with border, followed by would serve, but majority, it's not that far from those two voting methods. So to conclude, basically, what we can say is like the social choice theory is not that easily applicable in blockchain environment, and more precisely in chaining point environment. Majority rules seems to be more efficient to some extent. We have to remind that basically those experiments were conducted with a bit more than 300 persons, so it's not like empirical to some extent. It's not bad, but I think, first you need more. Also, other explanation could be like, probably users of decentralized justice and any type of protocol on-chain involving voting method and game theory will have also to get some education and to get more familiar with all the parameters to be able to really take decision regarding the game theory and social theory theoretical aspect. So of course it's quite difficult to really master the difference between those different voting methods, and usually the traditional voting method used, like in election or whatever, are majority rules, so it doesn't help. We also realized that we did not find that many learning effect, but again, it was like only 60 runs for each person tested. So, well, so it would mean for Kleros jurors like 60 Ks. Well, perhaps if we go above that, like by a lot, it will like lead to more learning effect for person. I think like 60 cases resolved by a person is not that much for a career, but yeah, it's still significant data, I would say. And well, yeah, so maybe at the end, people don't really care of those voting methods. They just try to gain the system, but don't realize that it could be also tricky to try to get advantage of the game theory, social theory that are made to defend the protocol and make sure that honesty are the best strategy. So yes, that's it.
We can go to Stefanos.
Sure. Oh yeah, sure.
Thank you for your presentation. Can I also share some slides, or do you want to discuss given the time constraints?
Do you have slides to display?
I can display slides, yes.
I mean, if you want, it's up to you.
Okay. Let me share some slides. I don't know if the font size will be okay. Let's hope you can read what I have here. Is this big enough or not?
Yeah, that's good.
That's good. All right. Okay. Okay. Great. So I will also try to quickly talk about some research that we have been doing on a specific topic, on a specific dispute, let's say, that is currently taking place on these blockchain markets. This is a very concrete dispute. It's about splitting money. What else can be more archetypal in this sense of dispute resolution? And I will try to connect it to the rest of centralized justice and raise some questions. Maybe in the middle, which it's going to be short, it becomes a bit mathematical, which can be a bit thorny to follow even more so late in the afternoon. So I'll try to focus on the specific problem and then on the outcomes that are relevant to our discussion, hopefully adding a different perspective on that. So the problem that I would like to talk about, which presents a very important ongoing dispute now in these crypto economic markets and decentralized finance, is that these two-sided markets are largely based on incentives, and currently they operate by users making transactions and by miners processing these transactions. And when I say miners here, I use this as an umbrella term to describe any possible entity involved in processing these transactions. So different protocols or blockchains or decentralized finance applications, they have different names. But what happens, and we're familiar with that already from traditional finance, where it has been regulated, and many people there in the audience know that better than me. When people submit transactions, the person who processes this transaction can make some profit. So, for example, through front running or other practices that are maybe considered now illegal in traditional finance and have been regulated. So what happens now in when these transactions are submitting through a blockchain, we don't have this regulatory framework. We don't have a central authority to enforce that law. And so we observe and so miners, the people who process these transactions, can observe the transactions before execution and decide which ones to execute in what order. And this creates space for some attack vectors like front running, arbitrage, sandwiching by inserting their own transaction, so one before the transaction to be attacked and one after, and many other ways that they can make money. This has a name. Its practice is called MEV, minor or maximal. Now the term maximal is more prevalent because, as we said, minor has different names in different blockchains. So it's called maximal extractable value. It's the value that the person who processed the transaction, the entity who processed the transaction, can extract from the submitted transactions. And now there's an ongoing debate whether this MEV is good or bad for welfare. For generally for the health of the ecosystem and for this decentralized finance networks. Of course, there is the anti-MEV perspective that this is, of course, harmful for user experience, right? So when you want to submit a transaction through your bank or buy a stock in the stock market, you don't want someone to front run you or to make money from your transaction, right? So this is a harm for user experience. But in these decentralized settings, it incentivizes miners or the entities to participate because they make money, they make profit out of that, and that's why they are incentivized to process your transaction. Whereas the bank, for example, retains some kind of fees for every transaction that make or your broker. And also they have some side effects. The more complicated, they stabilize prices through arbitrages between different exchanges. So centralized exchanges like, let's say, Binance, and decentralized exchanges like other places here, like Uniswap, that take place directly on chain. So the question here is, we have the users who create submit the transactions and create this value, We have the miners who process the transactions and now extract this value. And the question is how to share this value between these two parties. How much to give back to users and how much to give to miners. And of course, to do that, we need to regulate the market, right? And because we don't have a regulatory authority, this needs to be done through the protocol. This needs to be done algorithmically, because now the protocol is the law enforcing entity, if there is one, if there is such a term in this decentralized economy. And this is precisely the question. And the question is how to do it. How large do we want to make now the protocol to regulate those things? Because this whole market of MVS extraction has been developed on the side of the protocol, not directly in that protocol. It has not been foreseen by the protocol designers. So the goals, I will go quickly now through a mathematical part, and I'll go to the conclusions which are can be drawn from the mathematical analysis, but which are high level and relevant to our discussion. So the goals here is to enshrine the MV extraction in the protocol. As we said, this is a question, this is a debatable goal. And of course, to balance the incentives for user and miner participation, right? So we want users to be incentivized to transact through these markets, and of course, miners to be incentivized to provide their services in these markets. And as we know, on the blockchain, we have a block every couple of seconds. So these markets are very dynamic and they change over time. So you cannot say something that makes sense now under the demand conditions that you have now. So, for example, say give 0% to the miners may not be sensible in a couple of seconds, right? Where you want to give some money to them to incentivize them. So one component here that enters the picture is the time dependence of this of the resolution of this dispute. Now, in the framework that we have, another design choice, another desirable thing that we want to have here in any kind of dispute resolution, and also the other speakers in the panel and before discussed, so with these voting rules, that we want to have simplicity, right? We want to have something that people can understand. Because if we implement something very complicated, maybe this will deter people from understanding what's going on and they will not participate. And we have some other desired choices to target the balance between users and miners in the market, but this can be a desired outcome in a dispute resolution. And as also William discussed before, here we don't have binary outcomes. We have numerical outcomes that complicate things. So how much to give to each party, to each side of the market at each moment. So I will not go into mathematical details. I will just present a figure, and then I will just go to the conclusions. So the figure here shows how this mechanism, so this very simple mechanism to split the money can evolve over time. So to understand this figure, just fix a point on the x-axis. Let's say here we have this one, and just go vertically up and see the cloud of points that are created. So this cloud of points just describes the amount in very rough terms that is shared between users and miners at any given point in time. So if, let's say, we decided a mechanism and the parameter that we decided, we just can control one parameter to make the mechanism simple, is equal to 1, then we will get over time this cloud of points. Some may be reasonable for users, some may be reasonable, or some of these points users may like, some miners may like, and so on and so forth. And here in this figure, in this plot, we also plot the average of this cloud of points, which of course makes way more sense. Now the average is over, so time is the vertical component here. So over time, we have, of course, way more balanced outcomes. So without going further into the mathematical details, let me highlight some points of discussion that come out of this very mathematical topic and mathematical analysis. So dispute resolution in decentralized markets raises new challenges and design questions in the following sense. Disputes may evolve dynamically over time, requiring time-sensitive resolutions, meaning something that makes sense now or is good now may not be good later on. And the questions that we have here is how to define fairness in a system where outcomes depend on temporal factors. And of course, fairness needs to be discussed whether it should be about the final outcome, so whether we care that the system is fair after 30 days, or day-to-day, or on a day-to-day process, right? So as we said, when you traverse this cloud of points in these different states of the economy, some of them may be unfair, some may be fair for you, but the average may be fair over the long run. But do you care about the long run or the day-to-day behavior? So very different answers will come there. And the other dimension is that protocols and algorithms now substitute authorities, acting now as law enforcement mechanisms. And the big question that we need to answer here is how extensive should protocols grow in scope to regulate all those things. So to what extent should they regulate or incentivize any kind of behavior? And where should they leave room for emergent norms, like this case where, for example, all this MEV market was built off-chain. So it was an ecosystem that was developed without being predicted by the protocol designers. And here I have an image from one of my collaborators that I'm very fortunate to collaborate with, Barnaby Monod from Ethereum, who is precisely talking about those things on how to design the protocol to regulate things, so regulate up to here and leave an ecosystem to develop outside the protocol, or whether this curves, this circle, what the protocol can see should expand and cover everything. And you can see the talk Think Like a Protocol on YouTube. So yeah, the 2 points that I would like to contribute is this dynamic evolution of the dispute resolution and the size of the protocol as a law enforcing mechanism. Thanks a lot.
So we maybe have some time for questions. I think we're basically at the end of our allotted time, but we also started a bit late.
We can take 5 minutes for questions. It's fine.
Sure.
I will do the first one. So it's about the experiment that you did at this laboratory, and that you found that the answer, the findings were a bit surprising in that the, in theory, best voting methods did not end up being the best in the empirical study. How much do you attribute to these methods being hard to understand compared to majority method, being easier for most people to understand?
That's a good question. Well, I think at least a bit more than 50%. For sure, I think you have also the aspect of behaving for just gaining without taking in general that the focal point should be regarding honest behavior, whatever the voting method is. But for sure, so the person that did the experiment, they were not necessarily aware of those voting methods before the experiment, in general. We are not sure that they have studied those voting methods, but we present them the voting method some days before the experiment. So that's exactly the frame of a Kleros jurors, right? Let's say I'm selected as a juror for the first time. I can, by my own, just dive into those mechanism. And so, of course, if I did not do that, then there is a big entry cost, and it makes absolutely sense that it's easier with majority rules to kind of put some abstraction of, okay, what I should do to gain, vote as the majority, that's it, what's the difference scenario if I vote this or that, or if I accept a bribe. So, yeah, I think there is a strong part with the complexity of the voting method, but also the education underlying, right? So it's probably that if people are decently educated about that and are proven to be kind of a bit an expert on that, could be lead to different results, I think, because again, the theory around the social choice theory is still here, properly proven. So there is no reason to remove it just like that.
I also have thoughts on this, having been surprised by the results. So, one of my leading theories, I think we more experiments to find out more, is that people, when presented with the idea that they'll still be maybe partially rewarded if they put the right option second. Like may get, like some intrinsic laziness. It's like, it'd be fine. Like, I'll be, partial credit. And that incentivizes them to try less hard, somehow. Like, that is a theory that I have looking at these results. And the sort of question we have from that is we didn't test like a whole lot of different parameters in the payoff function. You can only vary so many things in your experiment. And is it that like the difference between putting the right answer first and second was too small, and like we don't make them, provide enough of incentive to make that experiment, or like are they being like super rational where it's like it's only like a 5-cent difference, I'm not going to bother thinking for an extra 20 seconds, or are they being like not rational enough and just relying on the vibes which may not really be justified that it'll be fine, the right answer will be second place.
And I think upon to that, it's the job of Kleros and the Kleros community to get those information and better understand like the jurors, how they behave, how they understand the protocol, and build that with them.
We have some time until the next speaker comes on the online, so we have some time for questions if anyone has. I have a follow-up for this in case. No, you want? Let me go first so I can. Well, I mean, if you had to design a new experiment based on now that we know about this, maybe jurors not understand, how would you design this to test, William?
Well, you want to test the thing that I just posited, that like, to what degree are people just have an intrinsic reflex that if they can put something second choice, like that's good enough, versus it actually being like big differences in the payoff function. We can vary what the penalty is in the payoff function. Where it's like, okay, you put a ranked choice, but like 90% of your payoff is putting the right thing first, and you only get like a tiny bit of partial credit for putting it second. Like how sharp do the penalties have to be before people respond to them? And is that good enough to make the like ranked choice voting systems like better than first past the post or not? And ultimately it comes down to sort of how people think. Yeah, I assume you have further thoughts.
No, I'm aligned on that. Yeah.
So this is a question for our virtual speakers surrounding MEV. And it strikes me as an additional potential systemic benefit for the network of allowing MEV is that of it reduces the likelihood of adversarial block proposal, which is the people building blocks composed of transactions have strong economic incentives to build valid blocks. Granted, they're certainly, themselves, they're ordering those blocks in ways that may be not great for somebody who comes later than they thought they would, but those are not actually malicious blocks in terms of bad transactions or other things that could actually be a direct attack. So the greater the percentage of built blocks that are ultimately proposed to the network actually reduces the level of, truly potential adversarial behavior with respect to the integrity of the network's rules. Is that consistent with your read on a potential benefit from MEV?
Yeah, that's an excellent observation regarding the advantages of MEV, the unexpected advantages. Really excellent observation. I couldn't say it better. So I would totally agree that this is one of the reasons that this totally unexpected source of, let's say, manipulation or exploitation that is imposed on users is desirable for the network. And one of the reasons that it's not a black and white solution, right? So you don't want to eliminate that completely, and you want to keep some incentives for the participants. And the algorithmic way that we are trying, the complication that emerges here is that exactly as you said, these blocks tend to be way more profitable during some times and way less profitable during some other time. And so how do you design an algorithm that decides based on the inputs from the environment to resolve this dispute, let's say, for every block in a different way, to provide a different percentage that will go to the miners or block creators and to the users for every block, given environmental circumstances. And of course, the question is how could one then game this environmental circumstances to fool the algorithm, like Federico was discussing before about AI and fooling the AI with adversarial images, and this is very much a threat here as well, a challenge here as well. But yeah, regarding the point, that's an excellent research. If that answers the first question.
Perfect. See, Jan, from the explanation of the three kind of voting systems, you're mentioning that the better choice will be majority without communication. So I wonder if it's possible in certain way for an experiment, because we're dealing with real cases that people have to choose one thing or the other. Right. Anonymizing the information, how anonymous could be, that will help to not communicate, because you're anonymizing the jurors and you're anonymizing the case itself. And also, instead of having 3 jurors, let's imagine that we have 5, and you take 3 votes out of 5 randomly. So you can, even if you communicate, you're having 5, and then you take 3 votes out of the 5. I'm just imagining if it would be possible to test the voting rights. What do you think? Like mathematician.
Mm-hmm. Can you just repeat the first question?
The first question is, we're dealing with real cases.
Right. So
if the majority vote, because what we believe is that people want to be comfortable with this dispute resolution method.
You mean majority vote, like you have
yes,
to...
for because we're dealing with the mathematical aspect of the system,
sure.
But also this has to be in a practical resolution of conflicts.
Yeah, that's the goal of
and when we talk,
bringing a solution.
I'm approaching this as a lawyer.
Yeah, sure.
So if we want to have a reliable system, you say, well, let's do something. Nobody knows who are the parties of this thing. So
who are
the parties in the conflict.
So we don't give them information about the
but there are ways to anonymize the file, the thing.
Yeah, okay.
Because I even realized that there are systems to anonymize the voice even.
On-chain, it's kind of working this way, actually. You just have the address of the person.
How do they communicate? How do we prevent the people to communicate and to keep that without communication? So the majority will prevail as a method.
So that's the deal of a decentralized environment. So first, you don't have by design tools on top of Kleros to communicate, right? You just communicate with the protocol. So sending information like evidence, whatever, presenting your case, and there is shared in a pool, right? And during the process, people have access to those information, but they don't have the ability to reach directly a party. They cannot communicate with any parties, any jurors first. But well, the problem is like you can find ways, in theory, to communicate with others. If you have the public address, you could go on a forum or Telegram or whatever. And as I said at the beginning of the presentation, you have the appeal mechanism. That is basically a mechanism design, and the idea is like you have an incentive to appeal if you feel like someone is trying to game the system, right? So it's all about incentives. So there is no strict mechanism to forbid any type of communication, but you have strong incentive to defend against communication, right? So,
I mean, yes. The appeal mechanism, like your idea about, you have 5 jurors, but you pick 3 of them, so you don't really know who's going to be. I mean, that's basically the answer to this question about juror communication. And because you can appeal, the people who are going to ultimately decide the case, they're the appeal jurors, if there's an appeal. So it's like, we try to have a best of both worlds, where, you want there to be a focal point that assumes the jurors aren't communicating. But at the same time, deliberation is healthy, and there's a lot of research on that too. And people inevitably are just going to talk about the case in Telegram groups. So we try to balance this by having both, because by saying these individual jurors can appeal, but they're not trying to coordinate and to communicate. But they're not ultimately incentivized to agree with each other. They're incentivized to agree with the hypothetical future juror in the appeal that they can't communicate with because he doesn't exist yet.
So the appeal, the second instance, it will be
The third and the fourth till the sixth. It's called sequential games, if you want the mites behind it. So it's very hard to compute this for a person. So that's the idea of economic incentive and the game theory approach of Kleros.
I'm totally convinced, but the thing is the community,
Sure.
because it has to be sold to the community. So the community have to understand this
Sure.
is for real,
So-
to solve real problems.
And I think it's related to the experiments. I mean, you have a slight process to do and make them understand everything. And but at the same time, we want anyone to be able to access as a joueur the protocol. So it's all about trade-off. And I would say, like, welcome to the decentralized world.
So, thank you.
Thanks.